Reading the Times for Friday, January 17th, 2020. Reading the Times for Friday, January 17th, 2020. Senate opens Trump impeachment trial as new Ukraine revelations emerge. The president called Representative Adam B. Schiff, Democrat of California, and the lead House impeachment manager, a corrupt person. His comments came hours after Mr. Schiff strode across the Capitol, flanked by the 6 other House prosecutors, to present the articles of impeachment to a Senate chamber hushed by the sergeant-at-arms who shouted, "Hear ye! Hear ye! Hear ye!" to bring the trial to order. As the public debate intensifies, the arcane rules of impeachment trials require the senators to remain virtually silent throughout the proceedings on punishment of imprisonment. According to the text, for hours on end, 6 days a week, as the world watches. Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, said he would immediately call for a vote to subpoena witnesses and documents that could provide new information about Mr. Trump's actions. Justice Department investigating years-old leaks and appears focused on Comey. The case is the second time the Justice Department has investigated leaks potentially involving Mr. Comey, a frequent target of President Trump, who has reportedly called him a leaker. Mr. Trump recently suggested without evidence that Mr. Comey should be prosecuted for unlawful conduct and spend years in prison. Law enforcement officials are scrutinizing at least 2 news articles about the FBI and Mr. Comey published in the New York Times and the Washington Post in 2017. That mentioned the Russian government document, according to people familiar with the investigation. Previously, federal prosecutors in New York scrutinized Mr. Comey after his personal lawyer and friend, Daniel C. Richmond, provided the contents of a memo about Mr. Comey's interactions with Mr. Trump to a Times reporter at Mr. Comey's request. For senators who will judge Trump, an incomplete story to consider. The GAO opinion especially makes clear that the documents we requested in our letter to Leader McConnell are even more needed now than when we requested it last month, because President Trump, simply put, broke the law. Democrats say the revelations by Lev Parnas, the Soviet-born associate of the president's personal lawyer, help bolster their argument for calling Senate witnesses. Contrary to the allegations the Senate has made, what emerges here is the confirmation that the House articles are well-founded. Still, it may not make much of a difference in the end anyway. My view is, whatever the facts, these 2 articles are so subject to future abuse that the Senate should dismiss them on their face, said John C. Danforth, a moderate Republican from Missouri, who served in the Senate. GAO reports say Trump administration broke the law in withholding aid to Ukraine. The agency, the Government Accountability Office, said the White House's Office of Management and Budget violated the law when it withheld nearly $400 million this past summer for a policy reason, even though the funds had been allocated by Congress. The hold on the military aid to Ukraine has provoked questions last year from officials at the White House Budget Office as well as the Defense Department while the freeze was in place. The impeachment vote by the House and the ruling Thursday by the Government Accountability Office focused on different questions. In Huawei battle, China threatens Germany where it hurts. Automakers. With the German automakers, including Audi and Daimler, already working closely with Huawei, it may be China who sits in driver's seat. Germany, like all of Europe, is under tremendous pressure to ostracize Huawei by the American government, which fears the Chinese company is a Trojan horse that would allow China's government to spy on or control European or American communications networks. If Germany were to make a decision that led to Huawei's exclusion from the German market, there will be consequences, Wu Qin, China's ambassador to Germany, warned last month. Reducing fire and cutting carbon emissions the Aboriginal way. In the woodlands surrounding her home, in the far north of the country, she lights hundreds of small fires a year, literally fighting fire with fire. Our firefighters have quite good skills in fighting fires, but for preventing them, they're very well short of what Aboriginal people could do. Last week, Victor Cooper, a former forest ranger in northern Australia, lit a wad of shaggy bark to demonstrate the type of fire that burns at temperatures low enough to avoid damage to sensitive plants that are crucial for food animals. The book, The Biggest Estate on Earth, uses documents from the earliest settlers and explorers to show how the landscape has been systematically shaped by Aboriginal fire techniques. American family stuck in Saudi Arabia while father stands trial. While United States diplomats have worked to restore the rights of Dr. Fatahi and his family, President Trump has never spoken publicly of his case, leaving his son wondering why he has not received the same attention from the White House as other Americans detained abroad. President Trump has a great record in saving Americans, so why has he not saved my dad? Ahmed Fatahi said. The senior State Department official said Dr. Fatahi faces charges, including obtaining United States citizenship without permission from the Saudi government and working with an organization affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, a transnational Islamic organization that Saudi Arabia, but not the United States or other Western nations, considers a terrorist organization. The senior official said that diplomats and other United States officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, had raised Dr. Fatahi's case with a range of Saudis, so far to no avail. Taliban offered to reduce violence in Afghanistan ahead of deal with the U.S. The Taliban has offered a brief period of reducing violence in Afghanistan during ongoing negotiations with the United States diplomats. 3 officials familiar with the talks said on Thursday, a concession seen as important to finalizing a preliminary peace deal between the insurgents and the United States to end their 18-year war. Details of the offer, confirmed by Western and Taliban officials familiar with the negotiations, were unclear, though the Taliban have said in the past that a reduction in violence would mean scaling back attacks on major cities and highways. The Taliban's willingness to reduce violence is likely to lead to the signing of the deal between the insurgents and the United States that includes a gradual withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan in return for Taliban pledges that Afghan soil will not be used by international terrorist groups to launch attacks against the United States and its allies. TV cameras coming to English criminal courts. Cameras will be present to record only judges' sentencing remarks in Crown courts, which handle more serious criminal offenses, including the Old Bailey, the main criminal court in London. Many state trial and appeals courts in the United States permit cameras, and some federal courts have run pilot programs, though the Supreme Court has rejected the idea. In Britain, filming has been authorized by the Supreme Court since it was created in 2009, and some English and Welsh Court of Appeal cases since 2013. The American Mustang ruffling feathers in South Korea. One of the first questions Mr. Harris was asked upon landing in South Korea was about his mustache, with some South Koreans apparently wondering whether it was calculated insult to the Koreans. Which side will he choose if he asked to choose between South Korea and Japan? Mr. Harris's appointment to Seoul also came as South Korea's relations with Japan were at a low point over disputes rooted in Japan's colonial rule. Asked Friday about the ambassador's remarks on inter-Korean exchanges, a government spokesperson, Lee Sang-min, said South Korea's policy toward the North was a matter of its sovereignty. Senior members of the governing party accused Mr. Harris of meddling in domestic affairs and even acting like a governor general. But behind many South Koreans' misgivings about the ambassador are issues with his ethnicity. Senate passes revised NAFTA, sending pact to Trump's desk. The vote came just one day after Mr. Trump signed a long-awaited trade deal with China, giving the president 2 trade wins in a single week. In part because of the Democratic stamp on the pact's terms, 37 Democrats joined 51 Republicans in voting for the deal, including opponents of the original North American Free Trade Agreement and others typically averse to trade pacts. The only Republican to vote against the deal was Senator Patrick J. Toomey of Pennsylvania, who Wednesday criticized it as a badly flawed agreement, an agreement that restricts trade rather than expanding trade. Democrats who opposed the plan did so mainly out of concern about the deal's lack of provisions to combat climate change. 7 found dead and 15 in captivity in religious sect in Panama. The bodies of 6 children and a pregnant woman were found in a freshly dug grave in a remote, predominantly indigenous community on the Caribbean coast of Panama, possibly the sacrificial victims of a ritual performed by a religious sect, the Panamanian authorities said Thursday. The victims have been kidnapped from their homes by other members of the community, beaten and killed, said Rafael Baloyes, the chief prosecutor of the province of Bocas del Toro. The authorities raided the community Alto Terón on Wednesday after receiving a tip that people were being abused there, the prosecutor said, adding that officials saw a post on social media about someone being burned. Japan and Thailand confirm new cases of Chinese coronavirus. Japan's health ministry said the patient had not visited any seafood market in China, adding that it is possible that the patient had close contact with an unknown patient with lung inflammation while in China. Malik Pierce, a public health virologist at the University of Hong Kong, said, if that was the case, then there had been no other direct exposure to animals. If that was the case, that there had been no direct exposure to animals, then that is very concerning, for sure. The disclosures on Thursday and Friday brought 3 to 3 the total number of confirmed cases of the new coronavirus reported outside of China in this last week. The woman is in good health now, according to Dr. Suthat Chatangpong, a senior official at the Disease Control Department of Thailand's Public Health Ministry. Of the 40 cases diagnosed in Wuhan, the majority of patients are middle-aged and older men, the city's health commission said on Wednesday. How hard is it to quit coal? For Germany, 18 years and $44 billion. Germany announced on Thursday that it would spend $44.5 billion to quit coal, but not for another 18 years by 2038. Germany doesn't have shale gas as the United States does, which had led to the rapid decline of coal use in America, despite President Trump's support for coal. China, which consumes half the world's coal, continues to build more coal plants at home and abroad. According to the International Energy Agency, China's domestic coal demand is projected to keep growing for at least the next 2 years before it levels off. Germany investigates 3 suspected of spying for China. German authorities raided the homes and offices of 3 people suspected of spying for the Chinese government, officials said on Thursday, giving no details about their identities or the nature of the alleged espionage. German officials were sifting through evidence gathered in the raids, which carried out early Wednesday on 9 homes and offices in Brussels and Berlin, as well as the German states of Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria. Mr. Schmidt said, the relationship has come under scrutiny since the Chinese acquired several German technology companies in 2016. U.S. and Iran are trolling each other in China. The embassies of the United States and Iran in Beijing have published a series of barbed posts in recent days on Weibo, a popular Chinese social media site attacking each other in Chinese and in plain view of the country's hundreds of millions of internet users. The United States Embassy has accused Iran of leaving bloodstains everywhere. The Iranian embassy has denounced the January 3rd killing of the general Qasem Soleimani and vowed to seek the end of America's evil forces in Western Asia. The battle has captivated people in China, where diplomatic rows rarely break into public view and the government often censors posts about politics. In its Weibo post, the Iranian embassy made a point of appealing to Chinese internet users, thanking them for their support, and even suggesting that they visit Iran for their upcoming Lunar New Year holiday. China's birth rates hit historic low in looming crisis for Beijing. On a deeper level, you would have to think about what kind of society China will become, not just demographically, but socially. Eno Zhang, a 37-year-old engineer in a tech company in Beijing, said he had argued with his parents for 10 years about his decision not to have any children. China's total fertility rate, at an estimate of the number of babies a woman will have over her lifetime, has fallen to 1.6 children per woman, and for years has generally remained below the replacement level of 2.1. The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences said last year that China's population contraction will begin in 2027. Russian parliament approves Putin's pick for prime minister. Russian lawmakers on Thursday overwhelmingly approved Mikhail V. Mishustin as the new prime minister, elevating a little-known technocrat picked by Vladimir V. Putin as part of an unexpected Kremlin shakeup. Mr. Putin on Wednesday proposed major changes to the Russian constitution that would spread political power more evenly away from the president to the parliament, the state council, and other government institutions. On Thursday, Mr. Putin appointed Mr. Medvedev deputy chairman of the country's Security Council, which advises the president. 2 days of history on Capitol Hill. Earlier in the day, the seven Democrats appointed by Speaker Nancy Pelosi as impeachment managers to prosecute the House's case walked 2 by 2 across the Capitol into the Senate chamber. They had already delivered 2 articles of impeachment, one on abuse of power and the other on obstruction of Congress, to the Senate on Wednesday evening. The highly orchestrated rituals of impeachment trial began on Wednesday when the House voted, largely along party lines, to transmit the articles to the Senate and appoint the impeachment managers. Ukraine investigates Trump allies amid reports of surveillance of Mary Yovanovitch. The current situation has heightened those sensitivities, with Ukraine caught in the middle of the conflict between Democrats and Republicans over the impeachment of Mr. Trump for his pressure campaign on Ukraine. The Internal Affairs Ministry of Ukraine said in a statement released on Thursday that the published messages contain facts of possible violations of Ukrainian law and of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which protects the right of diplomats on the territory of another state. Ukraine cannot ignore such illegal activities on its territory, the statement said, adding that the national police have started criminal proceedings after analyzing the new material. In a sign that Ukrainian officials remain concerned about such accusations, a statement on Thursday revealing the investigation said that Ukraine's position was not to interfere in the domestic affairs of the United States of America, but Ukrainian law and international obligations to protect the rights of diplomats serving on its territory has forced the country to respond, the statement said. An impeachment trial that could unfold out of public view. Americans tuning in to witness electrifying exchanges in the Senate impeachment trial of President Trump might be in for a shock themselves. Lawmakers could pull the C-SPAN plug and go into closed sessions at critical moments of debate over the conduct of the trial and the fate of the president. Senators met extensively in closed sessions during the impeachment trial of President Bill Clinton in 1999, at least 6 times, to debate questions on witnesses and whether to dismiss the articles of impeachment, and also to conduct final deliberations, much as a court jury would, on whether to remove him from the office. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, said closed sessions would undermine the credibility of the trial and simply feed the worst fears and exacerbate the suspicion and distrust the people understandably already feel. As the trial approaches, Senate leaders have already locked down the Capitol in extraordinary ways, tightening control over movement by news media and denying a request to allow laptops in the chamber to ease coverage of the proceedings. Angry Trump says focus should be on trade deal, not a hoax. He described Representative Adam B. Schiff of California, the Intelligence Committee chairman, who had read the articles of impeachment to the assembled Senate, as a corrupt person. He's a corrupt politician. He said the entire impeachment inquiry was a hoax, adding, everybody knows that, referring to a July phone call with him and he had with the president of Ukraine that helped touch off the impeachment inquiry. He said Democrats picked up a phone call that was perfect, but they didn't even know it was perfect. And then minutes after dismissing the reports from the Oval Office, Mr. Trump issued the Twitter version of a shout. At different times, Mr. Trump has also told aides he wants opportunity to call witnesses he believed could help him politically, like Hunter Biden, Mr. Biden's son, as well as a whistleblower, a CIA official who first alerted the Intelligence Committee to Mr. Trump's pressure campaign on the Ukrainian government. On a conference call with reporters on Wednesday, senior Trump officials said it would be extraordinarily unlikely for a trial to take longer than a few weeks, calling theirs an easy case, even as new details about Mr. Trump's effort to pressure Ukraine have continued to come out. No charges in assault complaint at VA hospital and the public fights. No charges in assault complaint at VA hospital and a public fight erupts. In September, Andrea Goldstein, a Navy veteran and senior policy advisor for the Women's Veterans Task Force on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, said she was assaulted on September 20th while buying a snack at the medical center's cafeteria. The complaint underscores a major problem in many VA hospitals across the country, trying to draw female veterans, the largest growing segment of the veteran population, even as many of them report harassment and or worse at the agency centers. Reaching a decision so close to the investigation with no criminal charges does not mean the underlying allegation is unsubstantiated. Mr. Takano, in his own response, called Mr. Wilkie's letter shockingly tone-deaf, outrageous. While my staffer bravely came forward in September, she did so in the spirit of wanting other women veterans to feel safe, Mr. Takano said in a statement. Intelligence officials invited to testify to House amid uncertainty. Representative Adam B. Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, issued invitations on Thursday to intelligence agency leaders to testify publicly in an effort to head off attempts to move their yearly hearing on global threats behind closed doors. The whistleblower, a CIA officer who lodged his complaint with the Intelligence Community Inspector General, has further increased tensions between the White House and the intelligence community. While intelligence officials are anxious to avoid a repeat of last year's hearing, many current and former intelligence officers have questioned the wisdom of a public hearing at all. Please try to help us conversing with Mississippi inmates on a contraband phone. Parchman, the oldest prison in Mississippi with a notorious reputation for harsh conditions, has descended into dilapidation and chaos, including a recent burst of violence that left several inmates dead. Inmates have used illegal cell phones to capture and transmit images, inmate fighting, broken toilets, holes in prison walls, dangling wires, and dead rodents caught in sticky traps that have come to define the crisis in Mississippi. Across the country, prisons are rife with smuggled cell phones, allowing inmates to access the internet, social media, and their old lives outside the prison walls. On Monday, Ms. Hall, the Corrections Commissioner, issued a statement reiterating concerns over Unit 29 at Parchman, quoting a letter she had sent in August describing a facility that was unsafe for staff and inmates due to age and general deterioration. As the violence flared, inmates broadcast live on Facebook as fires raged inside one prison. FBI vows to notify state officials of any election systems breach. The FBI said on Thursday it would notify state officials about attacks on their election systems, a shift designed to help election officials handle potential hacks as the nation braces itself for digital attacks on all fronts in the run-up to this year's election. The new policy was intended to encourage cooperation among the federal government, county election supervisors, and state officials. The official said law enforcement officials have learned from a number of experiences in designing the new policy, a senior Justice Department official said, adding that the aftermath of the 2016 election convinced them that election certifiers needed to be as informed as those who operate the ballot boxes. Trump to nominate a critic and an insider to the Fed board. A Fed board member has substantial but not absolute power at the central bank. Mr. Waller has spent his career in academia and within the Fed system, researching everything from Fed structure to its communication. Mr. Trump has pushed the Fed to slash rates and routinely blast the central bank and his hand-picked chair, Jerome H. Powell, for holding back economic growth. Sanders, Warren, and alliance, if not a close friendship, suddenly fractures. Misinformation, miscreants will have a field day with this. Ill will between Sanders and Warren supporters is now exploding on social media with angry memes, conspiracy theories, and harassing commentary mostly aimed at Miss Warren. Many Warren advisors and allies think the Sanders camp has long tolerated public attacks on her and from his surrogates, and believe he is not reining in divisive and in some cases sexist attacks against her among Sanders supporters on Twitter. Ms. Warren laid out a transition to a single-payer system, while Mr. Sanders repeatedly said he would do it in my first week of office. She tries to be a little flexible, says she wouldn't do it until her third year, and she gets attacked by him, said Mr. Frank, who has not endorsed a candidate but is friends with Ms. Warren. Grammy leader Deborah Dugan removed 10 days before ceremony. In a statement last Thursday, the Academy said that Ms. Dugan, who joined the organization last August, has been placed on administrative leave in light of concerns raised to the Recording Academy Board of Trustees, including a formal allegation of misconduct by a senior female member of the Recording Academy team. The board said it has retained 2 independent investigators to look into the matter. On Thursday, the Academy declined to elaborate on the reasons for Ms. Dugan's dismissal. Ms. Dugan's dismissal also came less than 3 weeks after she sent a memo to the Academy's head of human resources that detailed her concern about the governance and practices of the organization, which she said led her to believe that something was seriously amiss at the Academy. Her concerns detailed in the memo included voting irregularities, financial mismanagement, exorbitant and unnecessary legal bills, and conflicts of interest involving members of the Academy's board, executive committee, and outside lawyers. California governor wants truce with Trump in homeless fight. Mr. Newsom spoke of the meeting in an interview after announcing at a news conference that the state was mobilizing 100 camping trailers to shelter some of the state's more than 150,000 homeless people. The state has identified more than 1,300 state-owned properties that could potentially be used to shelter homeless people, a list that includes state hospitals and buildings used by the state's Department of Veteran Affairs, the governor said. Mr. Newsom said on Thursday that he had been encouraged by talks between the Trump administration officials and Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, and that state officials had had two exchanges in which the administration had laid out in prescriptive terms the support they could provide. Since being sworn in as governor a year ago, Mr. Newsom has struggled to set his own agenda on homelessness as he confronts crises like bankruptcy of the state's largest utility, repeated power cuts that affect millions of residents, and wildfires that rage up and down the state. Virginia Capitol on edge as FBI arrests suspected neo-Nazis before gun rally. The potential for an armed confrontation prompted fears of a rerun of 2017 far-right rally that left one person dead and some 24 injured in Charlottesville, about an hour's drive from Monday's rally. Who is Philip Van Cleve, the man behind the gun rally that has Virginia on edge? The governor, declaring a state of emergency throughout the weekend, warned that armed militias groups planned on storming the Capitol. On Thursday, the House of Delegates and the Senate held the regularly scheduled sessions under tighter-than-normal security in the Capitol Police. Security by Capitol Police. Several Confederate militias are also planning to attend the Richmond rally after attending an annual march in Lexington, Virginia. The Lee Jackson Day rally that honors the Civil War leaders on a weekend before Martin Luther King's birthday. Democratic Attorneys General sue to block Trump. Democratic Attorneys General sue to block Trump food stamps cut. Okay, that's where we're going with. Further, the administration violated the statutory rule-making process by adding elements to the final rule that were not in the proposed rule, and by not sufficiently addressing more than 140,000 public comments on the rule that were overwhelmingly negative, the state attorneys general say. The Legal Aid Society argues that the rule will have a negative racial impact, disproportionately and significantly increasing food insecurity in communities of color. Under the new rule, waivers commonly granted to states and cities will now be awarded only to labor market areas, defined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as have unemployment rates 20% below the national average over a 2-year period, or at least 6%. Under the new rule, the District of Columbia would lose its waiver, which it had for more than 2 decades, even though the unemployment rate is nearly 50% above the national unemployment rate. House to vote on disaster aid packages for Puerto Rico after earthquakes. House lawmakers introduced an emergency aid package on Thursday to help Puerto Rico rebuild after earthquakes devastated the already storm-battered island, challenging President Trump, who has resisted further aid to the Commonwealth. The Trump administration has finally shown signs of relenting in its attempts to illegally withhold vital aid to Puerto Rico, and must provide the rest of the assistance that Congress has already enacted for the island, said Representative Nina M. Lowey of New York, the chairwoman of the House Appropriations Committee. Some funding of the island's long-term recovery has remained in limbo, despite outcries from the island and its allies in Washington. Nazi sympathizer pleads guilty to threatening to kill Hispanic people. In another message, Mr. Lin wrote to the woman, who was from Spain, that he was acting under the authority of Hitler and God to declare Spanish and all Spanish-speaking people illegal. In July, he wrote, "I thank God every day President Donald John Trump is president, and he will launch a racial war and crusade." Eventually, Mr. Lin began to discuss kidnapping the woman, injuring her co-worker. Mr. Lin said he would pay the associate $25,000 after he drove the chained woman to Seattle, where Mr. Lin was arrested in August. Mr. Lin waived his Miranda rights and acknowledged in a video-recorded statement that the 2 Facebook accounts were his, and that he had used them to send threatening messages to the woman, according to a court document filed this week and signed by Mr. Lin. What America learned in 28 days. As soon as the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made the decision to hold back the 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump, Republicans complained about the apparent hypocrisy. In a May letter, Rudy Giuliani, Mr. Trump's personal attorney, requested a meeting with Mr. Zelensky, then Ukraine's president-elect. In my capacity as a personal counsel to President Trump, and with his knowledge and consent, Mr. Giuliani began leading the charge to drum up charges of corruption by the Bidens, even visiting Ukraine to do more digging while the inquiry was underway. On Wednesday, Mr. Parnas told The Times, I'm betting my whole life that Trump knew exactly everything that was going on that Rudy Giuliani was doing in Ukraine. President Trump personally ordered the hold on the Ukraine aid, even though top White House officials disagreed over the wisdom and legality of that move. Why does America hate its children? So Americans' refusal to help children isn't a part of a broad opposition to government programs. We single our children for especially harsh treatment. Even before immigration transformed America's ethnic landscape, there was a widespread perception that programs like Aid to Families with Dependent Children basically helped those people, the bums on welfare, the welfare queens, driving Cadillacs. So we should be talking a lot more about helping America's children. The Bernie Sanders fallacy. Productivity in industry with mostly less skilled workers rose by 20%, while wages grew by 24%. It's a rewarding productivity with pay, and some people and companies are more productive. It's rewarding productivity with pay, and some people and companies are more productive. A recent Brookings Institute Schumer Foundation report also notes that there is a growing productivity gap between superstar companies and everybody else. I'm a liberal who thinks immigration must be restricted. Now, many liberal Democrats, including those who call for the abolition of immigration and customs enforcement, seek to erase the distinction between legal and illegal immigration. A year later, I became a researcher and writer for the Center for Immigration Studies, which seeks restrictions on immigration. No one understood the moral ambiguity of the immigration debate better than the historian and immigration scholar, John Higham. Directors, let your gay characters be gay. Given the success of queer love stories, it strikes me as silly when creators wait until after the fact to reveal that their movies had LGBTQ characters or stayed deliberately vague about whether they exist at all. Choosing to meaningfully feature LGBTQ people in media by giving major named character queer line stories has real impact, especially on children and teenagers. Early LGBTQ role models in media influenced queer people's identities well into their adulthood. The drama within the royal family. There are plenty of other Windsors in the immediate line of succession to continue the royal show. Wouldn't we all love to be a part-time royal as Harry and Meghan, Duke and Duchess of Sussex, seek to be? Wouldn't we all love to keep the royal titles, live in glorious housing on the grounds of Windsor Castle, and attend only the royal duties we choose? Meghan and Harry want it both ways, keeping the royal perks, keeping income derived from Prince Charles, but living abroad half the year and focusing with their favorite charitable works. Seeking part-time royal status seems to be wanting all the advantages, but not the hard day-to-day work of representing the British monarchy. Lev Parnas speaks out about what Trump knew. Lev speaks. The phrase, what did he know and when did he know it, is often bandied about whenever high-ranking government officials is accused of wrongdoing. In the case of Donald J. Trump and Ukraine, this president knew everything and knew it from the very beginning because he set it in motion. In interviews with Rachel Maddow on MSNBC and with the New York Times, Lev Parnas, the indicted Soviet-born associate of Rudy Giuliani, left no doubt that Mr. Trump knew everything, and Mike Pence and Bill Barr were involved in a criminal conspiracy that attempted to pressure the young Ukrainian president to announce investigations of Joe and Hunter Biden that could have unfairly influenced our 2020 election. This new evidence is accompanied by documents that Mr. Parnas recently turned over to the House Intelligence Committee, which will undoubtedly be used by the Democratic House managers when Mr. Trump's impeachment trial begins in the Senate. The only question that remains unanswered is how many Republican senators will vote to uphold their oath of office and how many will continue to support the criminal in office. Message in a bagel, Bill de Blasio's. Thank you for giving us something to laugh about and chew over that isn't partisan politics or anti-Trump rhetoric. Maybe all political debate should start with a question to all participants. What's your favorite bagel? It would not only break the ice, it would also tell us something personal about the person answering. At heart, don't people ultimately vote for those who they feel some emotional connection? Jennifer Delos, how the police made a no-body murder case. Her worry grew after multiple text messages to Miss Delos went unanswered, and a phone call went straight into voicemail. At least one black garbage bag had traces of Mr. Delos and Miss Taconis' DNA. The police had also found 4 zip ties with Miss Delos' DNA, 2 of which were stained with her blood, that they said Mr. Delos had used to restrain Miss Delos. Mr. Delos has repeatedly denied any involvement in Ms. Delos's disappearance and has told investigators that he believed Ms. Delos was still alive. Aquafina's latest role, subway announcer. New Yorkers have thoughts. The voice belonged to rapper-turned-actress Nora Loom, who's better known as Aquafina and who has taken over the conductor announcements on the 7 train as part of a publicity campaign to promote her new show on Comedy Central, Nora from Queens. Miss Loom, who has roles in The Farewell, Crazy Rich Asians, and Ocean's 8, grew up in Forest Hill, Queens. We are exploring a new and different way to generate much-needed revenue while also surprising and delighting customers, said Sarah Meyer, Chief Customer Officer at MTA New York City Transit, in a statement. An interview about the new show, Nora from Queens, Aquafina returns to Queens, and Nora... blah, blah, blah. In an extremely unscientific poll of riders on the 7 train Thursday morning, the divided opinions seemed to fall along the age lines as well as ideological ones. Do riders prefer to avoid any possible interaction with fellow commuters? Are they open to opportunities to laugh with strangers at inside jokes about the city, as Miss Loom's announcement seemed to encourage? In the late 1990s, the city's Taxi and Limousine Commission enlisted around 40 celebrities to record announcements reminding passengers to use seatbelts and take their belongings as they leave the cab. He says he stabbed a student to defend his home. His home is a box. Mr. Matos faces assault charges for stabbing one of the men and slashing the other. He is fighting the case with an unusual argument. His lawyers say he was defending his home against attackers. The district attorney's office has argued in court documents that Mr. Matos's box did not meet the legal definition of a home because it was not a permanent structure with walls and a roof. Mr. Matos's previous lawyer also failed to mount a timely argument that Mr. Matos was protecting his dwelling and was justified in the use of deadly force, the office said. Even if his box was considered a home, Mr. Matos was outside and acted after the man walked past him, the office said in court documents. Weinstein seeks to move rape trial, citing carnival-like atmosphere. Mr. Weinstein's 11th hour request was submitted to the First Department Appeals Court, even as 7 jurors were seated for the trial, which is taking place amid sporadic protests and extensive media attention in State Supreme Court in Manhattan. The Weinstein trial has been strange and unusual from its outset. One potential juror told Justice Burke this week that he lived near the Tribeca Film Center, one of Mr. Weinstein's former haunts, and on several occasions had seen the former movie producer screaming at someone on his phone. The appeals motion dwelt at length on what the lawyers called, in the title of one section of their document, the unprecedented media spectacle that is the Weinstein trial. Mr. Weinstein faces a daily gauntlet of reporters, gawkers, and negative backlash as he makes his way to court each day, the lawyers wrote, adding that some among the news media arrived in their various perches as early as 5 a.m. A fresh wave of public attention, the lawyers said, swept over the proceedings of January 6th, the first day of the trial in New York, where Mr. Weinstein was charged in a separate case in Los Angeles. When Mr. Weinstein was charged in a separate case in Los Angeles with forcible rape, among other crimes. Mayor de Blasio offers minimalist $95.3 billion budget, warning of cuts. Even though city revenues are expected to be strong, the mayor said that the state's projected $6 billion deficit could loom large over New York City, and that the state could cut its funding to the city, or ask the city to increase its share of payments for things like the subway. The city's last budget was $92.8 billion, and included spending increases on things like providing social workers at the city schools, and a program to boost participation in the federal census. Scott M. Stringer, the city comptroller, said a mayoral candidate in 2021 said that Mr. de Blasio must protect the city from leaders in Albany who frequently target New York City's budget when the state budget is in peril. Gilgo Beach serial killings. Police reveal clue handled by suspect. The police have created a new website where the public can obtain information and leave tips about the case, Ms. Hart said. While searching for Miss Gilbert, the police discovered four other bodies in December of that year, between Cedar Beach and Gilgo Beach on the north end of Jones Beach Island. Miss Hart, the police commissioner, said at a news conference that Miss Gilbert's case does not match the pattern of the Gilboa Beach homicides, but she did not rule out a connection. Google reaches $1 trillion in value, even as it faces new tests. Activist employees have complained that Google is cracking down on workers who speak out on issues such as the company's treatment of sexual harassment or working with the American military on technology that could be used to improve weapons. Last year, Google fired several employees active in labor organizations for what it described as clear and repeated violations of our data security policies. It has also been working with a firm known for helping companies fend off unions. Jack Polson, a former research scientist who left Google in 2018, said the company's focus on maintaining growth and keeping Wall Street happy had changed its character. Barney's workers feel used as a march store towards death. Many of the concerns were detailed in the letter Friday, filed on Tuesday to the judge overseeing the bankruptcy case from employees who have worked at Barney's for more than 20 years. 5 current employees who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were still hoping to receive severance pay said the shortfall was not disclosed to Barney's workers. Ian Huntley, who had worked in sales at Barney's for the past 3 years, said he found the lack of money for his colleagues, particularly those who had worked there decades, to be appalling, especially given the role they played in recent months. A trade deal meant to heal rifts could actually make them worse. The deal signed on Wednesday by Mr. Trump and Vice Premier Liu He, China's top trade negotiator, cuts few of the American tariffs imposed over the past 2 years on Chinese-made goods and forestalls even more. The trade war has unleashed a set of structural forces that are likely to have a dampening effect on imports from China for some time to come, said Eswar Prasad, a Cornell University economist who specializes in China. The pact showed that China could not be bullied and that the United States is learning to live with China and accept China on its own terms, said Andy Mock, a geopolitics and trade specialist at the Center for China and Globalization, a Beijing research institute. Peacock NBC's streaming service will have free option and The Office. Despite taking its name from one of the flashiest animals on the planet, NBC Universal's Peacock streaming service is at risk of blending in with the flock. In exchange for paying nothing, the Peacock-free viewers will sit through commercials from State Farm, Target, Unilever, and other brands, making Peacock more akin to YouTube than Netflix. Some analysts have expressed the concern that NBC Universal may be cannibalizing itself to support Peacock, foregoing licensing arrangements and other revenue-generating deals for popular shows such as, The Office, to provide exclusive streaming content to its customers. Stocks continue record climb as earnings overshadow impeachment. After a 0.8% climb Thursday, the S&P 500 is up 2.7% in January, showing that nearly 11-year-old bull market still has plenty of legs left. The CAC 40 in France rose 0.1%, and the FTSE 100 in Britain fell 0.4%. Morgan Stanley shares rose 6.6% after it posted better than expected results on Thursday. The campaign to redefine Chinese restaurant syndrome. Chinese restaurants began displaying signs, no MSG. It was removed from baby food. In the case of Chinese restaurant syndrome, the activists hope Merriam-Webster will seek a thoughtful reconsideration, turning the phrase into a fragment of a different time. There's a lot of history and education that needs to be done around MSG and Chinese restaurant syndrome, so I hope redefining the term accomplishes that. Delayed by abuse claims, Apple's The Banker gets new date and release. Gets new release date. Apple announced on Thursday that the film would be made available on Apple TV Plus subscribers on March 20th, with a theatrical release scheduled for March 6th. One of the first feature films to be distributed by Apple, The Banker is based on a true story of Bernard Garrett and Joe Morris, a pair of Black entrepreneurs who recruited a white man to pose as the face of their business in an effort to work against the racist banking practices of mid-century America. Apple withdrew the film from American Film Institute's annual festival and canceled its December 6th theatrical premiere after Bernard Garrett Jr., a son of one of the film's protagonists, was accused of sexual misconduct. Rich people don't just live longer, they also get more healthy years. According to a new study, wealthy men and women don't just live longer, they also get 8 to 9 more healthy years after 50 than the poor individuals in the United States and England. The findings, published on Wednesday in the Journal of Gerontology, Series A, emerged from two primary questions. What role do socioeconomic factors play in how long people live? Do older adults in England stay disability-free longer than those in the United States? To answer these questions, researchers from University College London, Harvard University, and institutions in 3 other countries turned to 2 existing data sets containing more than 25,000 people over 50. What about all of those people on remote, beautiful islands who seem to live forever? The secret to their enviably long, healthy lives has little to do with riches. No, yes, of course, longevity is also affected by other factors, Mr. Lockenhoff said. Trump's next trade fight could be with Europe. In remarks in Washington on Thursday morning, Phil Hogan, the new European Trade Commissioner, gave a frank assessment of an important trading relationship that had grown troubled on many fronts. Mr. Hogan vowed to robustly defend the European interest as he justified the European position on trade spats with the United States over airplane subsidies, digital taxes, and the World Trade Organization. In an interview with the Fox Business Network in December, Mr. Lighthizer said the United States had a very unbalanced relationship with the European Union on trade, and that reducing the trade deficit with Europe was something the president cares about. Mr. Hogan dismissed that argument in his remarks on Wednesday. China's improving economic data masks deeper problems. China reported economic growth figures on Friday that suggest its economy is stabilizing after a year of consecutive quarterly declines. Some of China's economic figures look better in part because they were notably weak a year earlier. In China's auto industry, the world's largest, sales dropped more than 8% last year compared to 2018, according to a state-owned industry association. After hashtag activism, Hollywood assistants get a raise. The assistant scored a small victory recently when Creative Artists Agency, one of the big 4 talent agencies in Los Angeles, announced it was raising pay for its hourly workers, a group that includes assistants, mailroom clerks, receptionists, and agent trainees. Assistants are expected to work long, irregular hours for low pay while enduring sometimes abusive behavior without complaint. CAA informed its workers of the raises on January 9th, a day before the New York Times published an article on Hollywood assistants that included interviews with a number of entry-level workers in the entertainment industry who complained of low wages, bullying bosses, and hostile work environments. And that has been Reading the Times for Friday, January 17th, 2020. Reading the Times for Friday, January 17th, 2020.